When working with aggregation usage, there are two places that you can configure these settings. One is when you go to use the aggregation wizard, which is available on the Aggregations tab, the first button on the toolbar. The very first thing that it asks you to do is to review the aggregation usage. Because none of the settings have been changed for any of these attributes, all of them are currently set to default, which means that Analysis Services is going to use its own rules to determine whether to consider the setting to be full, none, or unrestricted. Now you can manually change these one by one here, but each time that you run the aggregation wizard, you'll need to make these changes over and over. If there are certain attributes that you always want to be considered, in other words, you want to set the full setting, or there are always attributes that you want Analysis Services to ignore, in other words, you want to use the none setting, then you can set the aggregation usage on the attributes directly. And you do that on the Cube Structure tab by opening up the individual attributes. Each of these has its own aggregation usage property. And notice that this is a cube attribute property rather than a dimension attribute property. So if you're using the dimension in multiple cubes, you would need to set this property on a cube by cube basis. So we can go to the territory, and perhaps we set country to always be considered. Therefore, we set the full, and maybe we set calendar year to full if our users are always querying by these particular attributes. If there are attributes we know that users don't use, or we don't want to have aggregations configured, we would set the aggregation usage to none. Then when we go to the aggregation wizard, we can see that those attributes are set according to the cube settings that we defined on the Cube Structure page. Customer is not showing up here because I selected the reseller sales partition, and customer is not associated with this particular measure group. If we go into the internet sales and start the wizard, we'll see that here is customer. We'll see customer is set to none, and we have the calendar year and country set to full. Of course, we can always override these settings within the Aggregation Design Wizard, but if it's something that we're going to do repeatedly, it's a good idea to configure the settings on the Cube Structure page.